Hello again and welcome to the AHF Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Schwab. My guest today is Josip Chuck Cakic. He goes by Chuck, and he's a true pioneer in the field of hip surgery. Born and raised in Croatia and practicing in South Africa, I first met Chuck at this year's European Anterior Hip Meeting, where I learned not only a little about his life's journey, but about his passion for hip surgery, his sense of humor, and his gift for being an educator. Chuck, welcome to the AHF Podcast.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me.
Chuck, it's a true honor to have you on the show. I know you have a really interesting story, and I would love if you could start by sharing a little bit about your story, a little bit about your background, being born and raised in Croatia, and eventually ending up in South Africa. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the life is unpredictable, and I'm a living example of that. When I finished my medical school, and I did start doing internship in Zagreb, where I'm born in Croatia, and I always wanted to be orthopedic surgeon. My passion was always orthopedic surgery, specifically sports parts of it. And it happened to be that during my medical school, I got in touch with a phenomenal person, Professor Rushkovsky, who was one of the Vienna school guys. And he introduced me to hip and into that phenomenal joint that I believe that is the center of the universe, by the way. And I did my first researches in a hip as a student, and I always wanted to be in a hip, and I always had kind of idea about a hip from looking into it from the sports side. But the life is different. So what happened is that I finished my internship and I couldn't get a job. They told me that I can get to orthopedic rotation in 5 to 7 years. And I said, I'm not going to be a waiter for so long. I'm going to go somewhere else. And in the meantime, that was a kind of a year that was already starting having problems in former Yugoslavia. And we didn't know what's going to happen. So combination of the factors basically was asking to look the other options. So I looked in Holland, and because as a student I was on exchange in Holland, so I knew people in Holland. But in the meantime, a very good friend of mine from my generation, from my class, he'll end up in South Africa, and he found me and said, listen, you don't have to know Dutch. You can come to South Africa. English is perfectly fine. So in a period of literally 10 days, I decided to go. I got the visa. I got married, sold my car, bought a ticket, and arrived to South Africa. So that was basically all happening in 10 days. And the rest is history. I came here. I looked for the job. I got the job. As soon as I got the job in a hospital as an intern, because I had to repeat my internship, I went to orthopedics department and I spoke to the prof, who was Prof. Erken at the time, a guy from Munich, German. And he told me, don't do any shortcuts. Start from the beginning, become a part of the team, and go forward from day one onwards. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did. And I did my internship. I did my senior house job. I did necessary exams, and I became registrar in orthopedics in 1995 and finished orthopedics. So that was my trip up. In 1999, I became specialist and went for the fellowship. Through the fellowship, I learned about more. I did a fellowship in hip arthroplasty, and that's what put me in touch with doing the research, put me in touch with the cross-linking and with the whole idea of cross-linking, because we didn't know what's going on. I mean, We're talking now 1999 going to in that period of time. And I did research even before, and that's how I landed with the cross-linking, because I don't know if the people know that the first cross-linking in the world was starting in South Africa in 1957, actually. So and it was published later on by Dr. Grobela in one of the biomechanical researches and congresses And the cross-linking was used for sterilization, not for improving the quality of polyethylene.
Mm-hmm.
But never actually got onto the worldwide market for two reasons. Number one, commercial limitation of apartheid in South Africa at the time. And secondly, it was a caramel color. It was a very much so color of the white coffee. So nobody wants to buy it. Everybody wants to crystal white specimen, not to have something which looks cack. Yeah. So that was and I came across some patients, they were having the same implants and they were lasting, instead of 5, 7, 10 years, they last 20, 25, 30 years. So that was beginning of my thesis and the PhD that I did. But and during the time of my fellowship, I came across of situations when I was facing the young people, and the only option was a hip replacement. So I was not happy with that, and start looking around, start reading a little bit, and find some funny articles, newspapers, that somebody is doing a hip arthroscopy. I didn't even know who that is. I didn't even have a clue what's going on. I just knew that some bloke in UK is doing it. Okay. Spoke to some of the local companies, says, guys, can you try to find out what's going on? Give me some idea. And that was 1999. And I start looking into that and researching. And that was a beginning of the preservation in practice. Not in practice, but in kind of in a cradle first, like in the beginning.
Yeah.
What we didn't have equipment, we didn't have anything. And that company brought me some instrumentation that I believed, I can't say 100%, that actually was a Dr. Glick's original set, that something similar to it. Mm-hmm. So my first operation was basically taking a piece of bone out of the trauma into the joint. So that was the idea, to look into the joint post-traumatically. And that probably took about 4 hours, if I remember correctly. I don't know. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but the problem was that I had ideas. I had a written kind of a guides how to do the procedure and where to look at it. And then I came across Dr. Bird's book. Somebody brought me from the States. Mm-hmm. And that was actually revelation. Then I learned how to kind of that is possible, that can be done. And that's how we start with that. And the problem was that when I finished my fellowship, I was fired from university. So I landed up without a job. So I had to go to private practice. Mm-hmm. And that's when my mentor, Dr. Professor Weber, he took me under the wing, and I spent 10 years working with him, and everything what I know about the hips I learned from him, besides preservation. But the point is that he was a John Charnley's direct pupil, and he was a big hip replacement surgeon in the country. But he was the one who actually encouraged me to do something different and to go into something that is not going to be only the hip replacement. And he was a guy who supported me from the beginning, and that was amazing. From somebody who is a arthroplasty person to have that kind of encouragement. So that helped a lot, and that includes the anterior approach, because this is few years later. I was unhappy with the big cuts, and that's how I start looking into the anterior approach. As you know, that was a time in the beginning of the 21st century when everybody was calling a small incision a minimal invasive procedure, mm-hmm. or minimal invasive surgery. So we were making a small cuts, but we were still doing the huge damages. So in my tour, going with the hip arthroscopy, visiting Dr. Tom Bird, visiting Philippe Onmal, was still working in Pittsburgh, going to France and visiting the anterior approach guys, going to Belgium. I went through all of that process of learning and learning, getting exposed of different approaches in different way how to do the procedures. And it was almost going parallel, the hip arthroscopy on one side and anterior approach on the other side. So this is how I kind of try to change the way of looking into the hip per se. That is not only open cut, throw in a dustbin, put something in. It must be something more into it. It deserves better. If any other joint in the body, we can look through this little camera. Why not hip? And that's what I believed in it, and I kind of started doing it, and that's it. That was my beginning.
Let's focus a little bit on the arthroscopy for just a moment, because I'm under the impression you're the first or one of the first surgeons to bring hip arthroscopy to South Africa. Do I have that right?
Officially, yes. There was a couple of senior doctors that were telling me that they were doing something like that in the 80s, but they were unsuccessful to perform any procedures. They were trying to put a camera into the joint as a kind of experiment or whatever, but they never managed to do any actually procedures. So, as a procedure, successful procedure, yes, I would say I was the first one in the country.
So, given that hip arthroscopy was, let's say, virtually non-existent in South Africa at the time, can you walk us through what it's like to be the first? What does it take to introduce a procedure, and what sort of barriers, either logistical or technological, do you run into in a situation like that?
So, number one, I wasn't part of university. I was everything what I did in my academic, my research and everything. I did everything through the private practice because I had to feed my family. With a wife, 2 kids, you have to work. So I work in private practice, and when I came across of hip arthroscopy, as I said, I asked one of the local companies or agencies rather, and which through the work, it's a little bit different system that I believe in the rest of the world, because we don't have tenders. We can actually, as a private doctors in a private hospital, you can actually choose for each operation whatever company you want. In other words, the hospital per se can't limit you to be for that year only for that product. You can actually have a variety. So there was a company that brought me the first arthroscopy set, which I used it on a cadavers, and I tried to figure it out what those notes are telling me. So this was a beginning, and then when I got across that particular patient, the first patient, I used it, and it was successful. I managed to find it. I managed to make a bigger opening and then put the forceps inside and take the instruments. And this was a combination of, because at that stage in my private practice, I was mainly doing, from the sports sides, I was doing shoulders and knees. So I was very comfortable with 70-degree lens, which I haven't been using at that stage, but I was using was only 30, but I was comfortable with arthroscopy as a procedure. So that wasn't a problem. The problem was obstacles of getting into the joint. So that was the beginning. The biggest problem is that most of the procedures in the beginning, I didn't get paid because there were no codes. There's nothing to be, how do you code it? How are you going to motivate that to the medical insurances? So that was a big problem. And I was coding the knees and shoulders. So combination of knee codes and the shoulder codes, because labrum is a labrum, a meniscus could be labrum, and so forth. ACL could be something, and osteotomy could be something. And there is a code in South African book that can be used as allow you to use these most similar coding to what you're doing, something like that. So I had support from the companies, obviously, because they want to sell and they saw something, but I didn't have a support from the institution and bureaucracy. So that was a problem for a very long time. I mean, Dr. Bird visited me while I had basically was doing all of that almost philanthropically, like not get paid and try to do something for just because I believed in it. And that was the reason why we started actually later on a South African hip arthroscopy society.
Right.
Because in order to get in touch and in order to make communication with the medical insurances, if you are one person, is a one story, but if you are association, it's a different story. So between 2000, when I started, 99, 2000, when I started, by 2011, when Sasha was started as an association, we had literally 8 doctors that had started, were doing to the point a little bit of arthroscopy. So we sat together, and that's how Sasha started. But I didn't invent anything new. I actually copied Isha, because I was introduced to Isha in 2008. I was one of the first members in Isha, and I met all of those phenomenal guys in Paris when everything started. And then in 2010, Ricky Villa introduced me to board. He asked me to come onto the board, and I became educational secretary for Isha. And based on what I was doing in the sense of education and organizing fellowships and everything through Isha in the first year of my educational board position, I said, let me do that for South Africa. And that's how in 2011 we started Sasha, to have a documentation, to have strength, to have a position that we can go and negotiate with the insurances, and that we can make it officially something that is actually to these days it exists, and obviously it's proven to be right that we believe there's something right. But those are the limitations are mainly related to money. Yeah. That's where the limitation comes into it.
When you talk about opposition from hospitals and from the bureaucracy, I think was the phrase that you used, did you see any resistance from the medical community, at least at the beginning? And if so, what was your strategy for building, let's say, trust and credibility with your fellow surgeons?
In 2004, I did my first presentation on the South African Orthopedic Society meeting for my results of the 50 first hip arthroscopies. And by the time that I came to the podium, I think there was 3 people left in the audience. If that gives you the best answer.
What types of, were these all trauma cases that you were presenting, or were these more preservation cases by this point?
There were of hip arthroscopy presented everything what I put together between 2000 and 2004. I put it together in one paper. It says, this is what I did. That's how many cases I did. So many converted into the hip replacement. So many are still happy. That's what it was. There was no big academic science behind it. It's just something to introduce, to show to the people. And I must say, by that time, Smith and Nephew, which obviously Mark Philippon and Tom Bird did huge influence in the United States in the development of hip arthroscopy equipment and hip arthroscopy as a name. So that came through Smith and Nephew, which does exist as an individual company in South Africa, not as agency. Obviously, that message came through. And me being there with Tom Bird and Mark Philippon and being involved in that with those people, they actually kind of said, maybe we can do something with you. So I had a huge support from them in South Africa. We built digital theater. They brought me actual hip instrumentation, which hospital bought it. So we had the first unit in South Africa that was capable of doing a hip arthroscopy. And then they start actually organizing the visitations, education visitation with other doctors were coming to my theater, and we will work together. And in the same way, we were organizing together the cadaver workshops. So this was a platform that started with, that was basically all based on communication between the company and myself, and that was all done through them. Obviously, with me being a consultant. Where the problem is to these days, 25 years later, is no interest in universities. Mm-hmm. Purely and utterly that in South Africa, universities are so overwhelmed with the trauma and with other kind of pathologies that actually arthroscopy per se, that takes, as you know, significant time in theater. It's not like quick knee scope. It takes significant time. there's no actual interest in it at this stage. We're still trying. I'm still teaching the guys. Registrars, the junior consultants are coming, but they're coming to my private practice.
Uh-huh.
So I am associated with academics and with the department in a way that senior registrars and the consultants coming to me. I'm not going to university. So and I have obviously fellows. So that is the arrangement that we have with academics.
Mm-hmm.
With the time, the medical insurances accepted the fact that a hip arthroscopy becomes a reality. And obviously, I'm not strong enough in a way to present papers and everything else as a one man with two hands and not having a backup power. But it helped knowing Tom Bird and Mark Philippon and other guys and Ricky Villa and those guys who actually published, and we had the documentation, and we could use that to argue and to basically make a deal. So this was very, very important. Mm-hmm. And as you know, in a part of the time that was the FAI was questioned in the United States of America by the insurances. I think that was somewhere around 2008, 9, somewhere in that times.
Mm-hmm.
And then we helped out because we had the data that we could support it. And that's what is so important, to have Isha or Sasha or whatever you want to call it. It's organization, a group, because you can collect all the data together and you can support. And that's exactly what we did.
So these lessons that you learned, sort of growing hip arthroscopy in South Africa, bringing on a new procedure, seeking out maybe state-of-the-art or a new way of doing something, what lessons did you learn from that you began to apply once you recognized anterior approach was something that you wanted to learn more about, or maybe also, grow as a practice in South Africa?
What I learned with the time, and I think the best example is the study that I did on the development on the DDH, where I followed up 108 patients that had a hip arthroscopy.
Mm-hmm.
And what's going on with them on a later stage. And 48% of them actually were converted to the hip replacement in a period of 5 years. It's maximum 5 years follow-up, but some of them were converted in a period of a year, and some of them managed to survive 2 or 3 years. So it depends how you're looking into what do you classify as success. 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, what is the success of hip arthroscopy? That's questionable. That's very individual. That we can define it ourselves, but for the patient is very individual. The bottom line is that preservation, there is a limit in the madness, and it's the same as a limit in preservation. You can't preserve everything. So that's why I put being in my mind anatomist and wanted to preserve whatever I can preserve. It fit perfectly my supine position for hip arthroscopy and my supine position for anterior approach. So what I learned as a lesson is that my conversion to the hip replacement is much less than it was 10 years ago, because I'm not as aggressive with the hip arthroscopy as I used to be. And what I'm basing that on, that my maybe 10 years ago, my consultation was half an hour to 45 minutes. Now my first consultation is an hour. I'm spending a much more time with the patient. I'm listening what they have to say. I'm listening to their symptoms, and I'm making a very careful decision if I'm going to put them into the dead basket or that basket.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to have a very, very clear picture what the expectations are of that person. And there are some of them, and they say, no, doc, I can't do because you're doing a scope, and I want you to put this stuff into my hip and save my hip. If you can save it, fine. If you can't save it, we try it. There are some people like that, but there are people who have expectations that you cannot give.
Yeah.
And that's the lesson that I learned, to listen to the people and to try to make at least possible mistakes. Back to the 5,000 years ago, Hippocrates says, do no harm.
So as you're learning anterior approach, tell me a little bit about that journey. You mentioned with arthroscopy, it was learning, through Tom Bird's book. Tell me a little bit about how you sought out your education for anterior approach.
That journey started almost the same time as I did my fellowship with Anterior approach, because Prof. Weber was, as I said, he was a Charnley guy. And one of the first 2 months, I have to do the Charnley wiring, which I wouldn't recommend to anybody. But anyway, the whole process of Charnley is beautiful. You can put a foot inside. And it's a beautiful reconstructive procedure, but it's not, in my mind, is not for primary. So I was looking into how to avoid such a collateral damage or other. And we start with the whole idea of making incision smaller. And then I brought to Prof. Weber Door's book about anterior approach, which came out somewhere around 2005. And we looked into that book and we looked into the things, says, okay, let's try to make incisions smaller. Let's try to avoid these damages. And eventually we managed to come down to making a lateral approach, or a variation of lateral approach, for the 10 centimeter cut. Obviously it depends on the patient. You can't do that on an elephant, but never mind. It was a very much so smaller. But I wasn't happy with that, because then I started reading about anterior approach as being anatomically anterior approach. So the first patient that I visit was in Belgium, late Dr. De Witte, who was doing a figure of 4, and he was, I believe, one of the first guys in Belgium who did that. And I looked at it, and it was fun, but South Africans are big people. They're in figure of 4, you need to have 4 assistants to keep that leg in position. In my opinion.
Wow.
It's a little bit of humor in it, but the point is that it wasn't something that I was impressed with anatomy. I was impressed with the procedure, but it's not reproducible for me in my environment. Then I went to Switzerland and spent time with the Marcus Michel, who was doing his way of doing it, which was kind of upside down in my mind. So I said, no, this is not for me. Then I visit Dr. Berger, who was doing a double incision procedure, and I liked it. I really liked it, because for us in South Africa, trauma is a bread and butter, and we know how to put a femoral nail down the shaft, and that procedure was based on that. Basically, you were putting the prosthesis through the separate incision as a femoral nail. And we started Zimmerbro. We did so many cases, but then was stopped. For whatever reason, globally, that procedure was stopped. But that was a very, very good idea. How would go into, in my practice, would that be so successful? I don't know. But my patients that I did for now, thank God, they are very good and they are happy with that. And then I'll end up doing it anterior approach French way. The company came to me as they knew. I mean, people talk, people gossip, people speak around. So they knew that I'm experimenting with something. So the company came, says, we met somebody in France. Would you like to go and see the anterior approach through this way? So, okay. Never heard of it. Well, let's go. And that's it. I married the procedure and I'm still married. That's it. And main reason for me is it's reproducible.
Yeah.
Using a table, I can put a 140 kilo person, I can put a 3 meter person, I can put a small little guy. I did operation with a stump, I did it with amputation, I did different operations in different people. It's always the same.
Yeah.
And that's what makes, and obviously because hip arthroscopy is basically on the same table. So I can do both procedures in a both identical way of draping, preparing, doing everything in the same way and anatomically same position.
And so how did you get connected to the European anterior hip meeting? Was it through these connections in France, or were there additional connections that got you involved in that meeting?
I met the mad guy in 2010 when Ricky Villa approached me to become a part of Isha board. The other person who was approached was Richard Field.
Richard Field.
So Richard Field and myself, we know each other since basically 2010 or 9. And we stayed very good friends, colleagues and everything else. So he invited me to come to London this year. And that was it. That was, I suppose, also, I think the Frederick Lord had a certain interest in it, influence into it, because he knew that I was doing it since my first anterior approach was in December 2006. So somewhere there. Yeah. The first private one was in January 2007, but I did some of them with somebody else, and I was visiting in 2006 the France. Actually, the first person in South Africa who did it was a few months before me, was a doctor by name Jan Hubert from Cape Town. So two of us, we were going together for the training to Paris, and that's how we started.
Tell me a little bit about the population of surgeons in South Africa doing anterior approach. Is it still relatively small? Is it a growing population, or has it blossomed?
I wouldn't say that it's blossomed. I think it's again Medacta, and he's not represented into, or Medacta. I'm saying Medacta is a name for in my mind, that is a anterior approach with a table.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm talking about. Is represented in South Africa with agency, not with the original company. So that agency tried to follow the same rules and patterns of education. So it's a very strict, very Swiss, if you will. So you cannot do it on your own. You have to pass the certain rules. You have to go and visit. You need to go for the education. Then you need to do the cadaver workshop. Then you need to have so many surgery done with a consultant. And then you have to do so many surgery yourself with a consultant presence. So it's ongoing process. And that in South Africa, in private sector that I'm talking about, because essentially we have two universes. We have a private sector that covers in a region about 15 million population out of 60 with a private medical insurance, and then we have a government system. In a government system, anterior approach was not as seen as going as fast as in a private.
Yeah.
But the junior, again, influence of the education, influence of the meetings, influence of the journals, brought to the surface that, well, we need to learn that, we need to know that. That is what it's all about. So yes, in South Africa, and we published that paper last year in 2024, when we look into the answering the questions from South African society, there is in a region about 36% of population of South African Orthopedic Society, they are doing it, or they are interested to convert into the anterior approach.
Okay.
So it is a significantly increased interest in it. I mean, since London, I was involved it was in June, so in last 2-3 months, whatever, I was involved in 2 cadaver workshops. So altogether, that was about 12 surgeons. They were interested in it. And another 4 surgeons were coming through my theater for visitation. So it is, especially the junior guys, they are very much so in line with being educated in anterior approach. And I'm sure if we repeat the same study in about 2 to 3 years, we're going to double those numbers.
Yeah. And it sounds like those numbers are very similar to what we see in Australia, which is around a third of surgeons either doing or highly interested in anterior approach. One of the things that I get the benefit of, I guess, when I travel is I get to meet young surgeons many of whom listen to the podcast, which is great, and are interested in what more experienced surgeons like yourself have to say about, advice, sort of life advice. And so, you mentioned in your story having multiple mentors. That sounds like were very influential in your career and the choices that you made. For the young surgeons who are listening and who are interested in orthopedics, what advice would you give to them?
If I can answer with something else, it's that when I travel around, I try to get visit somebody like you in your home, in your theater, and I'm trying to learn from you. So the message is very, I mean, I met Joel Mata many years ago on the meetings and things like that, but last time when he was in South Africa, we spent more time together, and I thought, you know what, if this guy, after so many years, can use an X-ray in theater, for example, and I'm having 3,000 operations and I'm not using it, why should I not start using it? The message is it's never late to learn, and it's never late to change and to adapt and to get better. So wherever I go, I try to listen, I try to learn, I try to change, I try to make it better. So I think for the juniors, that's the best message. Always, wherever you go, instead of going twice with the guys in the pub for the beer, go once and spend some time with somebody in theater and try to pick up the detail, because we're all different. And long time ago, my prof told me while I was a student, says, if you want to be good in medicine, you need to know English, German, and Italian. Those are completely different, and Italian and French he meant. Says these are completely different cultures, and everybody thinks different. And you pick up the best out of the three, and you're going to put your own soup. And that was the best message that I ever heard. And to these days, I respect American logic, I respect English logic, but there is so much into Italians, there's so much in the Germans, there's so much in the French, and we all have to read, learn from each other, and we all going to get better.
Well, I think that's a great message for our young learners, but it raises a question. So 3,000 hips in, you learn to use fluoroscopy. Are there other technologies or innovations that you're looking for on the horizon, things that get you excited or things that concern you?
Both. Like any orthopedic surgeon, I like toys. So this is what the companies knows, and they're selling us toys on daily basis. You know, and even though it's the same thing, it's just new, so we want it. But the point of the matter is that we need to be very cautious. Are we going to use the robotic surgery to replace surgery? That is something that scares me, because why do I have a fellows? Because I want to know who's going to operate on me. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And I don't want Da Vinci to operate on me. I want somebody else. I want somebody who has a brain, two hands, that can make a decision. I'm probably rough, but the point of the matter is that my problem is that what if something technically happens and you need to convert? And as far as I know, the conversion from robotics into the manual surgery is not so simple. I'm at the moment very much so involved into the navigation related to the hip arthroscopy, because navigation as a tool is something that can help us now. I mean, using a map and using a GPS, especially if your map is in the hand to your co-driver, which happen to be your wife, and then you don't know where you are. But the point is that there is a place for the new things, but that doesn't mean that our basic education and basic training has to begin with the new technology. I think that new technology can be adjuvant through the basic training. And that is what after so many years of traditional and kind of experience, I want to know if somebody using robotic, fair enough, but can you do that operation in the same manner without the robot? That's my question.
Yeah.
Preparation of surgery, anything around the surgery, fine. We can use any technology we want. But when it comes to the finesse of the hand and eye-hand coordination, I would like to know that surgeon knows how to switch the autopilot and go land properly.
Do you have any final sort of inspiring message for any of our listeners, especially the young surgeons out there?
Okay. I wouldn't be where I am without my family and my support. That's the first thing. Don't ever forget who is behind you and who supports you. That's the first thing. You can go forward. Medicine and being a surgeon is not a job. It is a life legacy. That is your life. That is a 24/7. And your partner has to. I'm extremely lucky that we live as a team. So I don't have a problem with that. We had a crisis like everybody does. But that is the most important, in my opinion, most important thing to try. When you go up and you want it to improve, you want to go up the ladder, whatever, you will never succeed if you don't have a support. That support gives you the energy. That support gives you everything that you can go forward. And if you go forward, just try to listen more than talk. I never learned that, but anyway. But it's so much to absorb and so much to take it, and much less to criticize and much less to say.
I really want to thank you, Chuck, for agreeing to appear and for being our guest here on the AHF podcast.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you again for having me. It was absolute pleasure and joy.
Thank you for watching this episode of the AHF podcast. As always, please take a moment to like and subscribe so we can keep the lights on and keep sharing great content and great conversations just like this. Please also drop any topic ideas or feedback in the comments below. You can find the AHF podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or in any of your favorite podcast apps, as well as in video form on YouTube /@Anterior Hip Foundation, all one word. Episodes of the AHF podcast come out on Fridays. I'm your host, Joe Schwab, asking you to keep those hips happy, healthy, and humble.